let's have a little read of this, right? And it's not the full thing because I think, look, it's locked off. So we'll just get the gist of it anyway, right? And this is from the Irish Independent today, I believe. So the headline, sex offenders could be given temporary release to cut pressures on overcrowded prisons, says report. A report from who? Right. So an expert group examined ways to relieve pressure on packed jails. So why would this be a concern, right? And the whole thing has several concerns attached to it, and we try and touch on a couple of them, right? So we just read what's there of the article anyway. So the Department of Justice was advised to bring in temporary release for sex offenders, saying they were among the least likely criminals to reoffend, even as they made up a growing proportion of the prison population. In a discussion paper on how to manage record levels of jail overcrowding, an expert group said there was a near prohibition on granting temporary release to those convicted of sexual crimes. However, it said this should be reconsidered if a system for electronic monitoring was put in place, right? So, two things there. Number one is, who is this expert group? Because you can be sure you're the one paying for it, right? So who is this expert group? Maybe it says so in the article and I'm just not privy to it because I'm not paying for it, right? Well, number one, more than two things, sorry. Number one, who's this expert group? Number two, sex offenders now are being said to make up a growing proportion of the prison population, right? So growing. So this is getting worse, is what this is saying to you. The rapes and sexual offences in Ireland are growing. They're getting worse. And the Department of Justice, Helen McEntee, Fine Gael, everyone who supported them and voted for them, right? And even those who didn't come out and vote, your silence is complicitness, right? It's complicity, right? So they've decided that in a nation where you have growing rates of sexual offences and growing rates of sexual offenders, in order to take these sexual offenders off the streets and put them in jail where they can't hurt anyone else, in the public at least, what we'll do is we will release more sex offenders that have already been caught and are in jail. We'll take them out of jail, and then in the spaces that frees up, we'll put in the extra sex offenders that have been introduced into this country. Right? And that's what we'll do, and we'll just keep doing that. Right? So, the only way that you could wrap your mind around this is if you're looking at degrees of sexual offense, right? So if you're dealing with someone who grabbed someone inappropriately, right, and ended up in jail for that, how likely is that, right? And then you're taking them out on early release and you're putting in someone who's after violently attacking someone. Maybe you can understand the logic behind that, right? But those are like exceptional cases, right? So the other thing is they are building the logic on this based on the recidivism rates, right? So the likelihood of sexual offenders reoffending is designated or deemed to be low enough from this expert group to justify releasing them out into the public again. And they're saying like electronic monitoring could be put in place. But sure, that's not going to deter anyone. If they're going to do the thing, they're going to do the thing. Right? So, the recidivism rates for sex offenders, is between, depending on what category you're dealing with, right? So it's between 5% and 35%. And it tends to increase over time. So someone who's released might not reoffend. They might be 20% likely to reoffend within 5 years. But within 15 years, they might be 35% more likely to reoffend, right? So what this government is doing, and there's not even a government there at the moment, to be honest with you. There's not even a government there, but the wheels keep turning anyway, right? So what the Minister for Justice and the Department of Justice are doing is hedging their bets that those they release won't reoffend. But whether they like it or not, just take things as they stand, right? Just pretend that there's no growing rate of sex offences in Ireland, and it's been stopped totally, and all the sex offenders that there ever could be are in jail at the moment, right? And outside of that, there's absolutely no sexual offences in Ireland, right? We have a clean slate. Pretend that for a second. By releasing some of these sex offenders that are in prison, in the hope that they don't reoffend, this government, or these animals, right, that are pretending to be anything other than animals, monsters, are increasing the likelihood of there being future sex offences by releasing these people. It doesn't matter if the rate is 5% chance of reoffending or up to 35% or 80% chance of reoffending. These people are perfectly okay with releasing monsters onto your streets. And their hands are probably tied a little bit here, because I would suggest that the reason these monsters need to release these other monsters, right, is because there's worse monsters that are doing horrible things across this country. And they maybe don't want it to spiral. Not because they see an issue with it, but because it will reflect badly on them, right? So this is what you're looking at, like. And if you couple all of these things together and create a chain, right? So you have these politicians that are okay with abortion. They're okay with 40,000 babies being aborted in Ireland. They are okay with voting against giving pain relief to these babies prior to abortion to ease the bit of, in the tiny life they have. They voted against alleviating the suffering that comes along with these fetuses, these babies' destructions, right? Now you're looking at bringing in these tens of thousands of men. You're seeing sexual offences blow up. You're seeing what would you call them, organisations, Rape Crisis Centre, etc., who have been overwhelmed with the amount of people reporting incidents to the point where it's not manageable. And now it says it here as well, like, made up a growing proportion of the prison population. So over time, more and more people have been put into prison for sexual offences, right? And this government has no issue with that. The only issue they have is people realising it and it reflecting badly on them. So this is where we are. These people have no issue with releasing sexual offenders onto the streets and increasing, this is just a numbers game, increasing the likelihood that you or one of your family members will be sexually attacked. This is where we are. And this doesn't seem to bother most people. If you're to believe the polls and believe the votes, doesn't really bother them. Fine Gael for life.